all. All right, good morning, everyone. We are presenting the ADA. Do I have to do that? This is going to be an interactive presentation given by our very own Jeremy Johnson Miller. Will be presenting to us today. We will go ahead and do the presentations. We try to allow for some time at the end for any questions. And then, of course, we do record this presentation and we'll have it available on our website later for anyone to watch. So without further ado, Mr. Jeremy, take it on over.
All right, thanks, Amy. So this is going to be a little bit interactive, so a little bit different than our typical transit tidbits. So Amy said questions at the end, but I would love to have interactive questions throughout. So if you can just kind of speak up and be a part of the conversation. Amy, if you could help me with questions in the chat, that'd be great too. But so this also, because I wanted it to be a little interactive, I wanted to make this a little bit longer because I think this is a topic we could talk about for a lot longer than 20 minutes. So hopefully we'll have some good interaction today, but I wanted to share this topic because I think it's really good and informative for you all, and you'll see there will be some interaction. So and I'll prompt you when that comes along. So right away, start off with what is the Americans with Disabilities Act? I'll have the answer on the next screen, but either a set of recommendations for accessible services. Next one is a civil rights law, federal requirements for transportation access, or specialized services for people who qualify. Anyone have an idea?
All the above.
Good thought. Anybody else?
I know.
Shout it out if you think you know.
Be a civil rights law or two.
Correct. So yes, it is technically a civil rights law. The others are factual, yes, but it is technically, the ADA is a law that was put into place. And so just a little bit more on that. The ADA is a civil rights law. The legislation was passed into law on July 26th of 1990. So just past that milestone, I think that's about 36 years. So it's been in place for quite a while. Prior to that, and the ADA built upon the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So if you're familiar with that Civil Rights Act, that gave a lot of protection and equal rights to people of color. And so it sort of built upon that to sort of solidify rights for people with disabilities. It also built upon and extended requirements under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So I had quite a bit of information to build upon to build that ADA. So I think that's what made it ultimately successful in moving it into an actual law, because it had some legislation already in place. And so it sort of built upon that language that was successful. And just ultimately the ADA is in place because it helps to sort of protect and provide equal rights for people with disabilities. So now, for our purposes, what does the ADA say about public transit? The ADA is broken down into what are called titles, and so it has 5 titles within the ADA. And state and local governments falls within Title II of the ADA. And so the other titles are Title I is employment, Title II is state and local government, Title III is public accommodation, Title IV is communication and sort of everything that falls into like TV and communication styles. And Title V is sort of that miscellaneous category that isn't necessarily covered in the other titles. And so today we are going to focus on Title II of the ADA. And within that, it does specifically lay out access to programs, which could mean accessible facilities, accessible bus stops, meeting spaces, etc. You probably hear our office or Jamie specifically talking about having your spaces accessible to all people and all users. Within that also is what's called reasonable modification. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit more because I think that one has quite a bit of detail that can get a little complicated. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about reasonable modification today specifically. But what that is just sort of small changes that we can make to our policy and practice, not necessarily making those permanent changes, but on the spot sort of discussion or determination on how we can make reasonable accommodation to our riders and our users of public transportation. But also it does touch on effective communication. And so that also means that our services can be available to everybody, whether it's if they need interpretation, like American Sign Language, Braille content, like our brochures and such in Braille. Websites, we've been talking a lot about that lately. Emma has been providing a lot of presentations on website accessibility, just sort of everything else that may fall under that communication tab as well. Just a little bit more on how the ADA addresses public transit. It does indicate that our equipment and vehicle features should be also accessible, allowing adequate boarding time for riders and passengers. So what that means is a person in a wheelchair could come on and they're not rushed, they're not just pushed aside. The driver does help them and does accommodate that and help them be secure and safe while riding. Additionally, the drivers are trained proficiency. That's exactly what it says in the legislation, but we can interpret that as much as we want. And so it does not have a concrete listing of trainings that we have to have, but it does give some recommendation, and that's what we try to do with these sessions, but also through IPTA, is just trying to make it possible to be efficient as possible and kind of know what we need to do to help our customers. Additionally, for fixed route services, it does indicate that there should be some sort of equivalent service, and that means ADA complementary paratransit. And that's primarily in urbanized areas, some small urban areas where the complementary paratransit operates within the same area within that 3/4 of a mile. And of course, accessible facilities, primarily your stops, transfer points, and all of those public areas within the facility as well. I mentioned that we're going to touch on reasonable modification. So that the code is right there at the top, 49 CFR parts 27 and 37. It does require agencies to make reasonable modification to policy. I highlighted reasonable there, and we'll touch on that a little bit more, but modification to your policy, practice, and procedure to ensure that your programs are accessible and equitable to individuals with disabilities. So I will touch on that a lot more, but some examples could be just assisting a person to the door, something that we may already be doing. Perhaps you're taking your paratransit services beyond that 3/4 of a mile. That could be reasonable in certain circumstances. Providing same-day service. It may not always be attainable for all of us, but that could be an option if you can do it. Allowing comfort animals outside of service animals. That could be a reasonable modification for someone that needs to use your service. It makes it easier for them to take your service. Just a little bit more information. We do emphasize that having a full policy should be available to the public. And what does that mean? Typically, being public or available to the public can be having it on your website. It could be posted somewhere else throughout the agency as well. But within that policy, it's encouraged to have some sort of complaint process as well. So similar to other complaint processes you may already have, it can sort of mirror that, but also some sort of appropriate follow-up. So people who may think that they need those accommodations and aren't afforded that, and that accommodation can have that opportunity. There are ways to deny some sort of request that's made, and if that request is altering or fundamentally altering your service, that can be denied. We'll touch on a little bit of those examples here in a minute. Maybe that request is a direct threat to others or the health and safety of the person or other riders or the drivers. So talking about animals that are on board or something like that, where it could be a direct threat. Or if they're just making a request because it makes them feel happier or something like that, but they're still able to use that full service without the request. And so that could be denied if you don't think that they necessarily need it, but they just want it as sort of a comfort type feature to help them. So I'll pause just real quick. I do have about 5 questions that we'll go through after this, but again, I want you to sort of speak up if you can, or have Amy help me out with some of that discussion in the chat, but I'm going to jump right in to some of these Q&As, so hopefully we have some fun with this. So first question, asking about a person's disability. If someone is requesting a reasonable modification, are you allowed to ask that person if they have a disability?
Anyone can chime in with a quick yes, no comment.
I would say no.
Okay. We'll go with that. So it is accurate. You should avoid asking about a person's disability. That is a lot of times none of our business. Instead you could have a separate conversation with them about their functional ability to take the trip. If they're making a request, you could say, well, what prevents you from using our service? Or something like, how does this modification assist you riding the bus? That can help you sort of determine their ability to use your service with that modification. But necessarily, you don't need to know what their disability is. You could ask it in a different way by asking, how are you able to access our services with this modification? So hopefully that was pretty quick and easy, but hopefully that is clear. Number 2. So we may see this quite often, but perhaps maybe your policy states that all passengers must be dropped off at the main entrance. Should a driver consider a modification for a passenger requesting a drop-off at an alternate location?
Yes.
Okay, we have 1 yes.
No.
Oh, we have a no. Okay.
It depends.
Okay.
It depends on how much it affects the route.
Okay. I like that. Okay.
Equal access unless
They-
a better stop is needed.
Okay. Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of really good points there. So ultimately, I would say it is allowable. It does fall into that sort of, it depends category, I would say. But it would be reasonable, depending on, I will put that, however, considering the safety of the alternate location. So perhaps there is another entrance to, let's say it's a shopping mall. Perhaps there is another entrance in the back, but maybe there's a low awning at the back drop-off location, or there's poor lighting, or maybe the curb cut isn't great, or we can't properly put down the lift to make it function the way it needs to function. So there's a lot of considerations there, but I will also say that, maybe historically, the transit agency has had a conversation with that facility, and they've determined that this drop-off location is the safest for your operation. However, I will also say too that taking into consideration of the rider, where maybe that front drop-off location is pretty far from the destination of that person. So maybe they are going to a doctor appointment, which is at the other side of the mall, where it's a lot closer for that alternate drop-off location. And so that could also be a part of your determination of how you're making that decision. But I would ultimately have that open communication with your dispatch and your schedulers to kind of understand all the different things that may happen with that. But ultimately, you do want to keep the safety in mind of your user as well. So if you can do it, this is absolutely an option. And especially, the other part too, maybe there's other riders on board and it may take a little bit more time to go around to different locations. But certainly if you have questions, maybe a supervisor can go out there and kind of scout out that alternate drop off too. Next one. With personal care attendants or a PCA, can a transit agency require a passenger to travel with a personal care attendant?
No.
No.
Okay, we have a couple no's, yeah. Yes, that is a no. And that is clearly within the 49 CFR 37.5E specifically. So if you want to check that out later, a transit entity is prohibited from requiring the individual to travel with a PCA. So the key word there was require. However, they can encourage a rider or a user to have a PCA. So if you're observing the rider having trouble with certain types of tasks while riding, maybe they're forgetting what's happening, or maybe they're not able to get around as easily. That might be a consideration of having that conversation of having a family member, a friend, or some other care attendant to ride with them. And remind them that the care attendant can ride for free as long as they're coming with them. I will always keep saying, keep safety at the front of mind as well, because you don't want anything to happen to that rider. You don't want to leave them at a certain location because you've got a bus full of people. So you don't want to keep someone stranded just because they don't have a PCA. So the law does also say that the driver is not required to wait with a passenger. So that's another consideration, and that does fall under that fundamental alteration of your service, because your driver is there to pick up and drop off individuals. We're not there to be a medical provider. We're not there to provide that additional, wait time or assistance for that personal care attendant task. And so that's sort of where I'm getting at with this one. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving on. Lift capacity. So hopefully this one's pretty straightforward, but some wheelchairs weigh more when occupied and can overload the vehicle lift capacity. Are you required to transport a passenger and their wheelchair in this circumstance? Give you a little bit more time.
No.
Oh,
I would think no.
So I put yes, but I'm gonna say this falls in that gray area also, or it depends. A transit system must carry a wheelchair and their occupant if the lift and vehicle can physically accommodate them. So what that means is that all of our lifts are designed with some sort of load capacity. And so that can be your determining factor. So say if it's, several thousand pounds, that can be your determining factor. And, if the lift is hardly moving, that can be your reasoning enough. But there is no requirement for the agency to transport the occupied device. And so you can make every attempt to accommodate that person. If they are able to transition out of their chair and into another device, or if they can stand long enough on the lift on their own and sort of do it that way, that would be a consideration to accommodate that trip. But the law does say that you should make every attempt to make that, but if you want, you can use that design load of the lift to make that determination. I do have a second part to this one as well, just to be safe. An operator may deny transportation if carrying a wheelchair and the rider would impose other safety concerns. So something like if their wheelchair and the occupant or the passenger is wider than the space, where then they are blocking an aisle or interferes with the safe capacity and routes, particularly in emergencies, that could be also another determining factor. So keep that in mind, but also, you don't want to get into a certain situation where the rider is unsafe, but also when we're talking about emergencies too, you don't want that to be something that blocks everyone else from getting out safely as well. So all of that combined could go into this determination of the lift capacity. So hopefully that makes sense and is somewhat clear. All right, everyone's favorite topic, service animals, and this is our last question. And so I broke it out into two questions or two answers, but what are the only two questions that you can ask a person about their service animal? There are two questions you can ask.
Can you
Anyone have
maintain
that?
control of your service animal?
Okay. Anyone else?
Can you prove this is a service animal?
Okay,
What service are they providing?
good. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the answer because that last response was pretty close. So there are two questions, and this is actually outlined in the legislation or the law. It says, is that a service animal? And what function or service do they provide? I will say also that, from my experience, if you are asking that first question, is this a service animal? And they say yes, then you should probably just stop your questioning. However, you can move on to number two if there's some other concern. So maybe the animal is acting up or it's bothering other passengers or something like that, where you can, if they say, yes, this is a service animal, you can move on to say, well, what function or, what service does it provide for you? And that can sort of give you a little bit more information, especially if you do have some sort of concern that's already happening with the animal. I will say that the service animal is not required to have any sort of identification or a visible vest. A lot of them will wear a vest, just because I think a lot of service animals are trained to wear that vest because then they know that they're working. And a lot of service animals, once they take off that vest, and they know that they can be, just a typical animal on their own. If they answer to, what sort of function does it provide, and they sort of indicate that it's an emotional comfort for the rider, that does not meet the definition of a service animal as outlined in the ADA. So, but again, always lead with some sort of safety in mind of passengers and others. The next part of this is, can a service animal be anything other than a dog?
Yes.
We have a yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Couple yeses. So yes, it does. It can be any guide dog, signal dog, or other animal individually trained to work or perform a task for an individual with a disability. So I mentioned in the previous slide that a comfort animal does not fall within that definition of trained to work or perform. Typically, if you see a service animal, you will probably never have any interaction with that animal. They are trained to be directly next to their person, and even on the vehicles, they'll lay directly under their seat or at their feet while on the vehicle. And so you will most likely not have any interaction with that animal at all. And so if you do have some animal that acts up or interacts with other riders or makes a mess of the vehicle, or hopefully doesn't move to that level of hurting anybody, that would not be an indication of a service animal. And so just being aware and observing the animal is probably the easiest way to understand. But I do understand that a lot of transit agencies are starting to just allow any animal until there is some sort of interaction. And so that is allowed too, where you cannot just deny entry because they have an animal, but there is a protection of someone with a service animal as well. So I will add too that I know that with a lot of services like Uber and Lyft that are out there, this law does apply to those organizations as well. So it applies to both public and private transportation. So a person with a service animal is allowed to ride with their animal on those services as well. This is my last question. So do we have any discussion on any of the questions that came up, or any questions?
Okay, I am not seeing anything else in the chat.
Okay.
So we want to thank you, Jeremy, for this interactive presentation. It's greatly appreciated. As I mentioned at the beginning, this has been recorded. So once everything is downloaded and checked, our coworker here, Emma, will be uploading it to our website for us to watch. in case anyone missed it. And of course, if you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to Jeremy or Jamie, and they'll be happy to answer any questions for you guys. Other than that, you guys all enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you for attending today's Transit Tidbits.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.